Hello everyone, this is Dr. Suchitra Srivastava, Professor in the Department of Management in the SAGE Group of Institutions, Bhopal. Today I'll be talking about measures of variation or dispersion. This topic is covered in the second unit of the course Quantitative Methods. The course is offered in the first semester of the MBA program. So let us begin by understanding what is a measure of variation. Now, a measure of dispersion or variation indicates the scattering of data. It explains the disparity of data from one another, delivering a precise view of their distribution. In other words, a measure of dispersion displays and gives us an idea about the variation and the central value of the distribution. Now, let us understand what are the objectives or purpose of finding a measure of variation. The different objectives are as follows. 1. To know the structure of a distribution. That is, if we get an idea about a measure of variation, we can find out whether the distribution is homogeneous or heterogeneous, or we can say something about the consistency of data in the distribution. Point number 2, to know the limits of values in a distribution. That is, it tells us about the least value and the highest value of a distribution. Point number 3, to know the nature and causes of variation in the data. 4th, to help in quality control by studying and or controlling variation. 5th, to compare two or more series with respect to their variability or consistency. Point number 6, to find the distance of the individual observations from an average or a measure of central tendency. 7th, to facilitate further mathematical analysis. For example, it helps in the computation of correlation, regression, testing of hypotheses, etc. Let us now understand the importance or use of a measure of variation. 1. It provides additional information that enables us to judge the reliability of a measure of central tendency. 2. It helps to compare the variability of a variable in two or more series. That is, to know the limits of the values in a distribution. Point number 3, to help in quality control. 4th, it facilitates further mathematical analysis. For example, it helps in the computation of correlation, regression, testing of hypotheses, etc. as mentioned earlier as well. Let us now understand the requisites of a good measure of variation. Firstly, it should be simple to understand. Second, it should be well defined. 3. It should facilitate further mathematical analysis. Next, it should be based on all the observations. And lastly, it should be capable of further algebraic treatment. Let us now understand the concept of absolute and relative measures of variation. Now, the absolute measures of dispersion are defined as follows. An absolute measure of dispersion measures the variability in terms of the same units of data. For example, if the units of the data are in rupees, meters, kilograms, etc., then the units of the measure of dispersion will also be in terms of rupees, meters, kg, etc. Some examples of the absolute measures of dispersion are range, quartile deviation, interquartile range, average deviation, standard deviation, etc. In this, the measure of dispersion is specified in the same units as the variable. Now, coming to the relative measures of dispersion. A relative measure of dispersion compares the variability of two or more data that are independent of the units of measurement. Here, the measure of variation is expressed as a percentage or as a decimal. Now, some examples of these measures are the coefficient of range, the coefficient of quartile deviation, coefficient of variation, etc. Thank you, students, for your patient hearing and happy learning.